This week, we are still in our series, Surface Tension. Pastor Brian talked about it a little bit. We're in week number 5, coming to a close. We're going to have 8 weeks. And we are talking about being emotionally healthy and dealing with an issue of our emotions that we don't quite often deal with in the church very much. And we've been using the image of an iceberg to illustrate our lives. 90% of the mass of an iceberg is beneath the surface. You don't see it, but yet it is controlling really the 10% that you do see. And we all have a 10% that we work on, that we show other people. It's just what we want other people to see. And we often neglect the 90% when that's the real important stuff. So this has been a series about the 90%. It's been very fun and comfortable, hasn't it? Yeah, but it's been very good as we learn and as we grow. And we have a statement that we're looking at that galvanizes this whole thing for us, and that's this, that it's impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. It's impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. Our emotions are from God. We are created in His image. He has emotions. He's given us emotions, and He doesn't want us to ignore them, but to embrace them and allow Him to redeem them. And so that's what we've been talking about. So far, over 4 weeks, we've talked about this. Week number 1 was the problem of emotional unhealth. Week 2, we talked about you have to know yourself so you can know God. Week 3 was we got to go back and so we can go forward. And last week, we talked about journey through the wall. That in our walk with God, we hit a wall or multiple walls, and the only way to go through it is to go through it. We don't go around it or we don't avoid it. And so one of the things that we've done is some of you have been asking for notes that you've missed, notes that you want to hand out. All of the notes are at the registration desk there in the cafe, or you can go online to our website, faithcommunity.co/surface tension, and you can download everything that we've made available. Take it, use it however you want. We just want to put the information in your hands. This week, I want to talk about another exciting, comfortable, fun topic, and that is grief and loss. And the title of the message this week is Enlarging Your Soul Through Grief and Loss. We're going to take a look at how grief and loss are actually gifts that God allows us to go through because He wants to do a deep work in us. I'm going to say from the onset, I don't believe that God causes grief, but He does allow grief and loss in our lives. There's no two ways around that. I would much rather not talk about this, just be honest, and just assume that everything's going to be, peachy and hunky-dory, but that's just not true. Grief and loss are a part of life, a very fundamental part of life. And it's about time that we talk about it and have some language and a paradigm for how to experience grief and loss and journey through it. But I want to say this, that grief and loss are not just about death. Okay? Grief and loss are about a lot of things. We grieve quite a bit. We experience loss more than just the loss of a person. And so I want to define real quick what grief really is, and then I want to talk about some examples of that, and then really spend the rest of our time talking today, how can we process and journey through grief in a healthy, productive, and godly way. Okay, so here's a definition of grief. I'm going to give you 2 real quick, and here's the first one. Grief is the normal and natural emotional reaction to loss or change of any kind. It is the normal and natural emotional reaction to loss or change of any kind. It is also the conflicting feelings that we have caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. The conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. We almost always associate grief with what? Death, right? That's when we talk about grief. But as I said before, we grieve quite a bit of things. When a season of your life comes to an end, you will grieve that season. Most notably, you raise children, they go off to college, they get married, part of you is super excited, right? You're going to save some money, maybe. But another part of you, you're going to grieve because your house is going to be empty and you're going to feel as if your purpose for the last 18, 20, 25 years, however long, has now changed. And what do? That is a season of your life that you will never get back to, you'll never return to. And then you get to have grandkids, which they say are better than kids, yeah? But still, you grieve that season. When you change jobs, you may change jobs because you got a good opportunity. You may change jobs because your current boss gave you the opportunity to change. but you grieve the loss of that. If any of you have changed schools, I changed schools a number of times and grieved the loss of the friendships and the familiarity. That's difficult. You can, grieve the loss of, as you get older, you don't have as much strength, right? And energy that you used to have. You can't do the things that you used to do. We lose things. We grieve. Anytime change happens, we grieve. Why? Because change is personal. All change is personal. I mean, think about as technology has changed. If you've had a job where they've changed the computer system and you've had to learn a new computer system, that was difficult, right? It threatened your job because you thought, what if I can't learn this? They're just going to get someone else to come in and the system's going to change whether I wanted to change it or not. Change is necessary. I think we all recognize that. We change to preserve that which does not change. But not very many of us like change. They estimate that about 75-ish% of the population has a particular type of personality that doesn't like change. And that's good. If we all like change, there'd be no consistency, right? We'd be changing all over the place. I happen to like change. Not all of it. I like to shake things up. I like to make people uncomfortable with change and challenging mindsets. And we've got to grow. If you will never grow if you don't change. Ever. You say, well, God is not a God of change. The fact the word says, He changeth not. His character does not change. His methods have changed quite a bit. He does not change. But the things we do change. And grief and loss are associated with that. I want to read to you a quote that really kind of talks about the purpose of grief. Because we have to ask that question, what is the purpose of grieving? Because if we don't have a purpose for it, then we're not going to engage in it, are we? Here's what it says, that grief and loss are meant to enlarge our soul. They should lead us to a wholeness, a richness, and a depth we never dreamed of. Grieving empties our soul of junk, and loss strips us bare before God. And in emptying, we create a holy vacancy for God, allowing Him to fill our lives. What is that saying? It's saying that anytime we go through change, anytime we grieve or we lose something, there is a vacancy in us. And that's what we're afraid of, that vacancy. Someone passes away. There is a vacancy in our lives. A season of life has changed. Something else has changed. There's that vacancy, and what grief and loss do is an opportunity for God to rush in and fill that with Himself. Although God does not stop it, He is not absent in the midst of it. He is our ever-present help in time of need. He wants to grow us. He wants to expand our understanding of Him. In Isaiah chapter 54, verse 2, there's a verse that says this. It says, enlarge the place of your tent. This is what they're saying to the people. Stretch out your tent curtains wide. Do not hold back. Lengthen your cords and strengthen your stakes. What is he saying? Hey, make room. Make room for more. Make room for God to be bigger in your life. Grief and loss are a process by which God expands our tent curtains, lengthens the cords, and strengthens the stakes of our soul so that we can have a bigger picture of Him and He can do more in our lives, in us and through us. But the reality still remains, we don't have a good relationship with grief and loss. I mean, I don't like it. There's not a part of me that wants to grieve anything. There's not a part of me that wants to lose anything. As much as I like change on my terms. I want to change and not lose. I want to change and bring with, right? But that just doesn't work. And we often deal with grief and loss not in an excited, welcoming way. Because I don't just pray, God, help me grieve. Give me some loss and grief in my life because I want to grow. No, I think that's ridiculous. I don't want to pray that prayer at all. I recognize it's coming. I recognize it'll be there. But my natural tendency is not to welcome it. Our natural tendency is to build defense mechanisms around grief and loss. So we have developed a paradigm or a structure by which we handle grief, and we can really spread this out across all of humanity. I want to share with you some common defense mechanisms for grief. There's 7. They're actually on your notes. The first one is denial or selective forgetting. What's that? We act like it didn't happen. Now, it's hard to deny the physical death of someone in your life. You can't deny that. But you can deny things like, well, yeah, I mean, it doesn't really bother me, right? You know, like I'm not worried in the least. Like you got fired. Like, I don't care. I'm good. I don't need that job. Yeah, you do, right? You need a job. And we say stuff that makes us sound tough that nobody really believes. And we think it makes us feel better, but really all it does is it just builds walls around us. We think that are protecting us, but in fact, they're destroying us and they're isolating us. That's how some of us deal with grief and loss. Secondly, we minimize it. We say things like, it's not that big of a deal. Like you meet someone that is an addict, and you're like, they don't really have control of me. Yeah, I just like use drugs every day, but it's not that big of a deal. I only drink when I'm bummed out. Well, you're bummed out 7 days a week because I say you're drinking 7 days a week. We minimize it. Why? Because if we can minimize it, we don't have to deal with it. We don't have to approach or acknowledge the severity of what's going on. We minimize it. 3, we blame others. This is classic, right? I ain't got no problems. It's your problem. That boss fired me because he's a jerk. She's a jerk. I'm the best employee they got. Well, have you got a raise in the last 5 years? No, my reviews haven't been that good. Well, I guess that's their fault too. Yeah. Right? You can blame others. What are you doing? Pushing back responsibility. You're refusing to deal with the fact that what happened to you is difficult and you're grieving and you need to engage in it. Number 4, rationalize it. We offer justifications like, let's take our weight, for example. Yeah, well, my dad was overweight. My grandpa was overweight, so I'm probably going to be overweight. It doesn't matter what I eat. Like, I could eat broccoli and salad and still gain weight. I'm like, how many actually believe that? Like, I've never ate enough salad and broccoli that it filled me up, and I'm like, holy cow, I think I got to stop and get fat. I ate enough broccoli, I feel bloated. That doesn't mean I'm gaining weight. Right? We make excuses. Well, hey, my dad was angry. My mom was a critical person. Therefore, I just come by it naturally. We rationalize it away. That's a way to not address it. It's a way to make you feel better about what you're doing. That's what it is. 5, we intellectualize. What that means. You find out you got a problem, so then you just cite, you go and read things about it, and you make yourself feel better because this expert said this and this expert said that, and you just get all in your head about it. It's a way to kind of really separate your emotions from your brain and to push them into category and say, hey, how I feel isn't really that important, but I've learned something. I can learn my way through this. You intellectualize. 6, distracting. That's a common one, right? You distract. What do you distract yourself with? Work, church, relationships. Week 1, we talked about I use God to run from God. You just get busy. Busy is not a solution. Busy is often medicating something, right? Because you don't want to deal with something. And I get it. We all do it. And then the last one, 7, is becoming hostile. We can get angry, irritable. When maybe it's a death and someone brings up that person's name, you say, we're not going to talk about that. It's not important. Or maybe you just start to leak a little bit, and you don't really become physically hostile to people, but your attitude and your approach to people starts to get a little sharp, a little more terse towards people, and you just start to leak because what's happened is it's like a pressure cooker. When I was little, my mom had this pressure cooker and it had the thing on the top that went, those things. And I thought, man, it would be cool. What if you take the top of that off? It's not secured to it. This one is just, and so I pulled the top of it off and it went all the way to the ceiling, and it melted some of the popcorn ceiling on there. My mom was like, what in the world are you doing? And I'm like, I just wanted to see what happens when you remove the what would happen if that. And what happens is that things in life come along and they move they take it off, and we just blow up and start melting stuff around us, burning stuff, right? Because we haven't taken the time to process what we're feeling, the grief and loss. So those are some common defense mechanisms. You might want to just go through the list a little bit later on and see where maybe you're at, maybe like all 7. But just say, hey man, I'm really struggling in this area. I'm minimizing way too much. And the more you do these things, the more you isolate yourself and the more you shrink back into it, and you don't really move forward. You hide behind these things. Well, what I want to do today is I want to take a look in Scripture and say, is there anybody that has experienced loss and grief in Scripture? And thankfully, there is. Thankfully, not that they had to go through it, but thankfully that it's preserved for us to see. There are quite a few people, and probably the most notable is Job. Job, he lost absolutely everything. A lot of scholars believe that Job was the very first book of the Bible written. It's the oldest book of the Bible. And Job was a wealthy man. He had a lot of cattle, he had a lot of land, he had a large family, and he had absolutely everything. And what we read about Job is a difficult book to really read through because it really challenges a lot of what you want to believe about God. that God is fundamentally good, and he is, that he always provides, and he does. But some of us think that God is there will never be difficulty in our life. There will never be loss or grief, and that's just not true. The book of Job opens up with this discussion of God, and Satan comes to God, and he says, hey, your servant Job, I really think that he will, if I take everything from him, that he will curse you and walk away from you, and God doesn't believe that will happen, but God allows things to be removed from Job's life. He allows the grief and the suffering because he believes that in the end, Job will not curse him. So God allows it. Now, that presents a very difficult thing that God would allow that in life, and he does. How does a good and benevolent God allow suffering into the world? That's a question that we have to answer. And if you don't answer it, you're going to sit across the table one day from somebody, and they're going to ask you that question. And you're going to have a framework, or at least the capacity to engage in that and say, you're absolutely right. Suffering exists in the world. But God is not absent in the midst of it. He does a lot. Now, we could take a big detour here, and we could wax philosophical on why that is, but I just kind of want to proceed from the foundation today that it is. Grief and loss are present. And how is God present with us? Job struggles for 35 chapters with God. 35 chapters. He's back and forth with God, and he's got 3 bozo friends who are just telling him all kinds of stuff, giving him their opinion of what he should do, and he waits them out. Finally, tells them to shut up and get out of here because their opinions they start to diverge and move away from God to Job. Just do whatever it is you need to do, because Job loses his wealth. His family dies. He gets sores on his body. He's scratching himself with broken clay pots and ashes. I mean, he is at the worst of it all. And for 35 chapters, he is just laying it out there. He's angry with God. He is telling God how he feels. And it is just an exercise in someone who is struggling, but yet being honest and open and vulnerable before the Lord. Something that we don't really have a theology for, that we don't really think we can do, that we can be that honest and open before God to say, this is absolutely horrible. I want you to hear from Job. I'm going to read 2 passages of Scripture where you can hear the words of Job as he's going through this incredibly difficult situation. Here's what he says. Chapter 3, verses 3 and 4. He says, let the day perish on which I was born, and the night that said a man is conceived. Let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor light shine upon it. What's he saying? Hey, God, I curse the day that I was born. It would have been better if I had never been born. It would have been better that the thought would have never entered my parents' mind of me being born. That's how much he's suffering. Chapter 6, he says this, oh, that my vexations were weighed, and all my calamity laid in the balances, for then it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore my words have been rash, for the arrows of the Almighty are in me. My spirit drinks their poison. The terrors of God are arrayed against me. This is in Scripture. What Job is saying, God, you have shot me with your arrows. They are poisonous. God, you are against me. He's not cursing God, but he's laying it out there saying, God, this is absolutely horrible. Where are you? Why would you even allow this to happen? Listen to that. How many of us could say that we've been that open and honest before God without being afraid of what he was going to do? I mean, read through the Psalms. It's an exercise of David, again, being open and just laying it bare before God that this absolutely stinks. Where are you? And you get all of the chapters in. God is seemingly silent for 35 chapters. And Job is going through this, laying it before God, waiting out his friends, and then he makes this statement. Job makes an amazing statement where he says about God, he says, though you slay me, yet I will trust you. Though you slay me, yet I will trust you. Incredible. To me, it's one of the most humbling and leveling phrases in all of Scripture. Though you slay me, yet I will trust you. He's gone through the loss, and he's come to this point where he has found God still being present and faithful in the midst of it. Now, God restores everything back to Job and more. But Job makes this statement before that happens. Though you slay me, yet I will trust you. And then the book of Job, it concludes with God telling Job, you are my faithful servant. God was present all the way through, and Job had to journey his way through the grief and loss and to be able to preserve not only his belief in God, but like we said, his soul was enlarged to the point where he could say, though you slay me, yet I will trust you. That grief and loss are in fact gifts that God uses to benefit us and draw us closer to him. And what I want to do with the remainder of our time is just give you five ways to approach grief, kind of a paradigm of how you can approach the grief and loss in your life. And starting with the foundation being that this is actually can be a good thing that God will use. Not that he caused it, but he has allowed it, but that he's present in it. And the first thing is this. What we have to do is we have to pay attention. Pay attention to what? Our anger and sadness. Pete Scazzero says this, that grieving is not possible without paying attention to our anger and sadness. Grieving is not possible without paying attention to our anger and sadness. I want to say from the very onset that anger, sadness, and depression are not sins. They're not sins. Anger is not a sin. Sadness is not a sin. Depression is not a sin. Growing up, I was led to believe that if you were angry, you were being sinful. But then I look at Jesus in the temple, right, when these guys are selling stuff, and he goes all Indiana Jones style, makes a whip, and starts whipping them out of there. He is mad. He's being angry, and he's not sinning. Anger is an emotion that God has given us. What we choose to do on the basis of our anger is another thing. Anger can overcome you and overwhelm you, but anger in itself is not sin. Being sad is not sinful. Being depressed is not sinful. Well, then what am I being if I'm angry, sad, and depressed? A human being. That's what you're being. Right? I mean, in the church, sometimes we view depression as just such a thing that we don't want any part of. Well, so-and-so is depressed. Well, what's wrong with them? Well, they don't have enough faith in God. No. They're a human being. They're struggling with depression. I talked to a pastor yesterday. He was at a men's event. And the guy that was preached for like 11 minutes. He said, all right, now I'm going to pray. I just want to invite pastors into the front to pray. And he said, if you're here today and you're struggling with suicidal thoughts, and this is a Christian environment, okay? You're struggling with suicidal thoughts, I want you to come forward. And 50 men got up and walked forward for prayer with suicidal thoughts. We can no longer treat depression as if it's just somebody's fault. It's a real thing that we struggle with. Is depression from God? Not saying it. I'm just saying it's something we struggle with. About a month and a half or 2 months ago, the Christian kind of world was rocked with a pastor in California, 30 years old, 3 children under the age of 5, who took his own life, struggling with depression and the pressure and anxiety. He'd gone on a sabbatical. He had tried to get help, but he couldn't handle it anymore. And some of you can say, well, he just gave up. Well, maybe that's your opinion, but the reality is that he was struggling so much. And in our Christian kind of environment, we don't have the vulnerability and the permission with which to walk up to someone saying, I am struggling with depression. Because we're afraid of that, oh, you don't have enough faith. What's wrong with you? I don't know what's wrong with me. That's why I'm talking to you, I'm struggling. Why? We have to pay attention. Emotions are indicators, not enemies. If you treat anger and sadness and depression as an enemy, you will ignore it and you will isolate yourself and they will only get worse. Only get worse. And I also want to say this. I believe that medicine has a place, mental health medicine has a place in a Christian's life. Some of you say, well, I don't agree with that. Well, you take medicine for your blood pressure. You take medicine for your pain. Some, well, it's a lack of faith. Well, why don't you change your diet? Rather than taking a pill, why don't you pray? I mean, God can lower your blood pressure, but if you keep eating, junk food, I think it's a kind of a dumb prayer. God, I want to eat whatever I want to eat, but change my blood pressure. Oh, I don't have to change what I eat. I can take a pill? Even better. We need to step back and look logically at this and see maybe there's some things that God has given people the gift and the ability to understand, just like doctors. Luke, who wrote the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts, was a doctor that used medical practices in the day to help people heal. Now, I'm not saying that I believe that medicine is the answer, but I believe it is a solution while still believing in the God of the universe, that he's capable and he's able. Right? We have to pay attention to these things. They are so important. We have to not discredit and have such of a weird view, I think, of depression in the church. It's really sad, because there are some of you out here today that are struggling with that very thing. And yet you're so afraid to talk about it because you don't want to be perceived as something. And I just want you to say, I want you to know that, hey, you are welcome here. Hey, look, I've struggled with depression. I went through it. I shared last week about my wall. I went through it. I gained weight. I didn't really realize I was depressed until I kind of came through it. But I've struggled with it myself. And God is faithful. He's present. But don't struggle alone. Okay? Don't struggle alone. Because you're not alone. You're not alone. I'm not going to do this, but if I ask everyone here to raise their hand who struggle with depression or this, you would see that, hey, it's not just you. We are not, an island unto ourselves, like John Donne said. We struggle together. So pay attention. Number 2 is this. You have to wait in the neutral zone. What in the world is the neutral zone? The neutral zone, you look on the back page of your notes, you can see we actually added a little graphic there. The neutral zone is that place in between. When you've experienced loss or grief, there's been an ending to something, a letting go of something, you get into the neutral zone. On the other side of the neutral zone is a new beginning, right? But this is, you're not where you used to be, and you're not where you want to be. You're just in the middle. It's what was, and what is, will be. But you're just in this uncomfortable, confusing middle. There's a great book out there called Managing Transitions, and it's really written more on the level of an organization and a business and how they change, but the principles they use really, really apply to individuals as well. And this is where I actually got this graphic of the neutral zone, because it really, really helps to think about it. When you grieve, when you lose a loved one, when you lose a job, a season of life, whatever the case is, you let go of something or something is taken from you, and then you enter this neutral zone where you have to wait and figure out and gain some perspective and a point of reference to really move forward. I'd like to tell you that the neutral zone is quick and easy and you can avoid it, but you can't. You can't. If you want to look at it on a spiritual level, when the children of Israel left Egypt in slavery and bondage, of which they had been in for 430 years, they went in the wilderness. The wilderness was their neutral zone. They were there for 40 years. There was an entire generation that could not enter the promised land. They knew what their new beginning was, the promised land. But an entire generation could not let go of the past, and they died in the neutral zone. Some of us never emerged from the neutral zone because we will not let go of the past. We are trying to bring something into the present and the future that happened in the past, and it has to stay in the past because that's where it happened. We have to trust God that if we leave it in the past, it'll be okay. That the vacancy in our soul, due to the loss, He will fill and restore and give us a new beginning. It is in the neutral zone that people give up, that people leave, that people try to find something else, that we rush around all frantically trying to find something to fix it and add explanation for it, when the best thing I think we can do is what David would say in Psalm 37:7, be still. Be still and wait. Be still in the presence of God and wait patiently for Him to act. Being still is doing something. It is action. It takes action to be still. The tendency is to rush and be impulsive and try to fix it, but sometimes we just need to be still and wait for God to act. Wait for Him to give us a reference point. Wait for Him to give us a word. Wait for Him to bring healing in our souls. Because waiting is stopping to consider and understand what He's doing. What happened? That we fundamentally don't have the answer of why, but we don't always need to know why that happened to move forward. I think why is answered in retrospect with the gift of perspective. You don't often understand why until, I don't know, I'm going to say 5, 10, 20, 25 years later, depending on the situation, you can look back and say, I understand. But you don't get that answer in the neutral zone. But you do have the faith and understanding of knowing that you're moving to a new beginning, that nothing that God takes away or allows to be taken away will just remain. He will restore and give something new and better. He will expand your tent curtains and your tent posts. He will do that. But you have to move through. Here's what I want you to do. I want to encourage you to do this. Take the neutral zone thing here, this graphic, and just kind of as if it were a transparency, lay it over your past and look and see what was an ending, what was a neutral zone, and what was a new beginning. And as you begin to decipher what the new beginnings were, it'll build your faith and trust to know that God never failed you. He never left you. And even in the neutral zone, although difficult, it was a very formative time in your life. Think about that. Consider. Write down in a journal, because you're going to go through something else like, God, where are you? What have you done? I don't see you. Have you ever been here? And you can look back and say, new beginning, new beginning, new beginning, new beginning. He's faithful and he's good. I don't feel it. I don't connect with that right now, but God, you have always been and you will always be. Take that, lay it over your life as if it were a transparency, and begin to rehearse and understand the faithfulness of God. Wait in the neutral zone. Don't try to go around it, because the only way is to go through it is to go through it. Kind of like a wall, the neutral zone. Number 3, embrace the gift of limits. You all have limitations. I have limitations. Probably one of the most difficult things for us to come into an understanding of and accept is our limits, that we're not Superman, that we can't do it all, that we're not as smart as another person, we're not as gifted as another person, we don't have as much money as another person, that if this or that, all these things, we have limits. Some of the limits we have now, we didn't have 10 years ago. But the older you get, right, you experience some limits. I want us to see that our limits are actually a gift from God and they're not a punishment, okay? And it's when we can settle in within our limits that we can see how God can work within us, because we're unique, right? We have a unique set of gifts and talents that God wants to work within the confines of our limits, because in our weakness, he's made strong. In our weakness, he's made strong. Embrace your limitations. What are some limitations? Well, number 1, your body is a limitation. You can only do so much. You can only work so much. You need to get sleep. Time is a limitation, right? Time. That's the one resource we all have the same amount of. It is no respecter of persons. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can't make more time. We all get the same amount. Maybe not in years lived, but we all have the same amount of time to work with. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 60 minutes in an hour, right? But that's the same. It's a limitation. What are you going to do with your time? Marriage is a limitation. Not the institution of marriage, but when you are married, the two have become one. You can't just do whatever you want. Right? That's why Paul said, hey, if you want to do a lot for ministry, don't get married. You can do a lot more. But if you burn with passion, get married. And I'm like, Paul, I burn with passion. It's better for me to be married. Right? That is a limitation I welcome in my life. But you have to think about that. It limits what you can do, because you're responsible for more than just yourself. Kids, right? As much of a blessing, limitation. Pets are a limitation. You can't just leave your house because they're going to do stupid stuff in your house, right? Much as you love your pets, you got to consider that. Your back, how you were raised, is a limitation. How you were raised. Not everybody was raised the same. Some had more opportunities than others. Some had a better model laid out than others. Now, you can grow beyond those limitations, but recognizing it, they're limitations. And embrace them. Be thankful for them. It's your limitations with which then you settle into that. Man, you're good. Gifts and talents are limitations. You know, just realize this. There is somebody smarter than you. Like when I played football, the coach would always say, there's always somebody bigger, faster, and stronger than you. And smarter. So you better work hard or else. That's true. Hey, there's somebody bigger, faster, stronger, and smarter than me. I'm okay with that. But just because they're bigger, faster, stronger, smarter doesn't mean they're going to be better. Right? I just accept the fact that, hey, I'm not going to be as smart as Einstein. I may not ever have as much money as Bill Gates. But that doesn't mean I can't be successful. That doesn't mean I can't be a productive human being. What makes us a non-productive human being is when we say, yeah, if I had, if I were, if I could, then I would. And you're going to live the rest of your life with your expectations being so in the ground and not going to do anything, and you're going to blame it on other people. Then you're going to rationalize, minimize, intellectualize, and become hostile. Because you're grieving something, you think you lost something you never had. You know, you're not 6'8", you're 5'2", and you wanted to be in the NBA. I'm sorry, but you were never going to be in the NBA. So stop grieving something that was never going to happen. You know? Embrace the limits. Saying, God, thank you for these limitations, and thank you that in my weakness, you're made strong. And your expectations will come in line, and they'll be much better. All right, the fourth thing. This is a good one. Climb the ladder of humility. What in the world is a ladder of humility? Throughout church history, people have been so faithful to give us paradigms and constructs with which we can use to journey through this life, because our walk with God is a journey. It's not an event, right? It's not an experience. It's a journey. St. Benedict put this thing called the climbing the ladder of humility, which is really kind of a process of sanctification, but it's also a way that we can manage and deal with grief and loss in our lives, because grief and loss enlarge our soul, and they do that by providing some things for us, and there's some outcomes and growth for us on the other side. And I'm just going to share 4 of the rungs of the ladder with you, but there's this big sheet here we have out on in the registration desk you can grab and take with you. You can look at it in more detail, but kind of a way for you to process through grief and understand what's happening are these rungs of the ladder. I'm going to share steps 3, 4, 5, and 8 with you, just things I pulled out. Outcomes of going through this. Number 3 is this. There's a willingness to subject yourselves to the discretion of others, or the direction of others. What's that mean? That when you're going through a difficult situation that you don't know how to make it through, there's probably a good chance that you don't have the right answers, and they're not going to come to them on your own. And there's a part of humility that's being willing to say to someone, I don't know what to do. This is what I think, but can you help me? And now do this with people you trust, not the bonehead friends that like Job had, okay? Don't do this with people that make bad decisions all the time, because you get bad advice. People you respect, people you trust, a spouse, a parent, a friend, a pastor, a coworker, someone you trust. Hey, show me my blind spots. Show the fault in my thinking here. Now, this isn't fun, okay? But it's so helpful. Are you willing to submit yourself to the direction of someone else? Where they can say, hey, look, I think you're missing it here. But if you would do this, people who love you and care about you want to do this. But you have to want it. Otherwise, you ain't going to like it. Okay? Submit yourself to the direction of others. The next rung, step 4, is you become more patient to accept the difficulties of others. When you go through difficult things and you get to see your brokenness and your life put on display, it creates empathy, a capacity for you to understand where people are and where they're coming from, and then you cannot make such quick and fast judgments on them or about them. And you can say, hey, look, yeah, I think what you're doing is really annoying and stupid. But I've done that too. And I see where you're coming from. I always believe there's a root to what people are doing. There's a story behind it. There's a context there. And as Christ followers, we should be willing to look at the context so we can get an explanation so we can help them. We don't excuse behavior and we don't allow people to stay where they're at, but when we gain an understanding of why, it's more important why you do what you do than what you do. Why? Why? And aren't we thankful that God did not write us off simply on the basis of our behavior, but he saw the context, and he's patient and long-suffering with us. See, we become more Christ-like as we climb this ladder of humility. The third one, that you become radical honesty about your weaknesses with other people. I said from the onset of this series that if you really want to get a lot out of this, you're going to have to be vulnerable with yourself and other people. Like, how many of you like to talk about yourself and all the good things that are about you? You all lie. Come on. How many of you like to hear about the good things? Yeah. How many of you would love if I just got up here every week and talked about how amazing I was? How like, hey guys, I'm preaching this stuff to you, but I don't really struggle with it. I don't really need it. You're going to think, what an arrogant jerk. And you're going to stop coming. Right? We relate and resonate with one another because of the weaknesses that we share. Man, I love to hear people, pastors and stuff, get up and share about their weaknesses. There's this video I watched, T.D. Jakes. He's interviewed by a guy named Stephen Furtick, and he talks about the most difficult times in ministry he wanted to quit. I've watched that like 10 times, and I cry every time. And I'm like, wow, if he felt that way, wow, I'm not alone. And then you get the but God, right? See, when you talk about the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities, it's always but God moments. But God. So I'm going to encourage you to sit around a table with people that you trust. That's why I say, hey, get in a small group. Talk about what you struggle with. There's freedom in that. There's power in that. There's growth in that. Because what you're saying is, I care more about what God is doing in me than what you think of me. What you're saying is, hey, let's talk about that 90%. I don't care about the 10 anymore. The 10 is, whack, right? It's like, it's not helping me at all. Not helping me at all. You're choosing to engage in the 90%. And the last wrong I'll share with you is being transformed into the love of God. See, spiritual formation is being conformed to the image of Christ for the sake of others. You're allowing God to conform. You get to the top of the ladder. You're becoming more like him every rung you step up. Hey, it's about the love of God. He loved me. While I was still a sinner, he loved me and he saved me. And you embody the love of God. Your life is defined by the love of God. And it's not some feeling that gives you goosebumps. It's directing every action and word that you say. You're just becoming more and more like him, and he's doing it. He's enlarging your soul. He's enlarging your heart. He's making you more like him. And grief and loss are a vehicle through which he does that. I don't believe he causes it. I don't believe he initiates it or instigates it. I believe when that vacancy opens up, he rushes to fill it. See, I learned that when my grandfather died. See, my grandfather died. It'll be 4 years in January, and I thought the world of him. He was amazing. I had never lost anybody really close to me. And I was so afraid for him to die, not because I didn't think he would go to heaven, but because I didn't want to know what grief felt like. I was scared to feel what it was like to lose someone close. And God did such an amazing thing in that process. My grandfather was a pastor. He pastored us through his own death, which was amazing. He gave us a paradigm with which to grieve and how to honor. And it was incredible. It was a gift. Most people don't get to experience it. It was a gift. He taught me how to face death. And then I ended up losing a grandparent, 3 grandparents, 3 consecutive years. Boom, 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 boom. And I was so thankful for the enlarging of my soul with my grandfather's death that I could approach the death of my other grandparent. But not only that, I saw how now I can walk into a room when someone else is going to pass away, and I can have a capacity for empathy and compassion and be able to understand that death is not an ending, it's a transition. Right? It's a transition. It's a transition into a new beginning. And you sense what's amazing. And if you've done this, you know when someone is passing away and they're a believer, the presence of God in the room, because it says in Psalms that precious in the sight of the Lord are the death of his saints. I'm telling you, you can't explain it. But God being present in the moment of death, it will blow your mind. Now, I'm not saying go look for it. No. But it's just absolutely, it just kind of, for me, it just kind of like, it incapacitates me because I said, my brain is saying, God, this is not right. I don't like death because we were never created to die and we really don't have a category for it, but yet because of sin, there's death, but yet you are here in the midst and the presence of it, redeeming it, and you promise eternal life, and now you've come for your saints to deliver them into an eternity with you. God is present in that moment. He's so present. And the last thing that I want to share with you just quickly is this, is that you have to let the old birth the new. You have to. I said this before. You cannot continue to hold on to what was and experience the new beginning that God has for you. In nature, we see this, right? California's been burning for the past month and more. And it's reducing that forest to charcoal, but there will be life that comes out of that. The leaves that are turning now, how many love the leaves? But you know the only reason why they're turning colors? They're dying. All that green stuff, the chlorophyll in there is just running out, and these beautiful colors are emerging, but the colors are emerging in death. We see the beauty in death in nature, and we find the beauty in the death and grieving and loss being a pattern in our lives, that God brings beauty from that. And my encouragement to you today is if you are still struggling with grief and loss, whether it be over a person, a season of life, a job, whatever the case may be, that God is present in that, and he wants to bring you to a new beginning, but the only way to that new beginning is through, not around. Let what was in the past be in the past, and trust that God has a better present and a future for you. And I really do believe that God wants to use what we've talked about today as a way to begin to heal that's your soul and heal your heart. In the neutral zone, I think a lot of healing takes place. But will you wait long enough to stay in that neutral zone? Is the question. I recognize this is not a fun topic. I recognize most people don't want to come to church every week and talk about grief and loss. And for the record, we won't be talking about it a lot. But I thought to myself, how bad would it be if we don't talk about it and offer a paradigm with which some way for us to engage in it, knowing that the vacancy will come, but that God will be there to rush in and heal us and fill us with his presence and do whatever it is that we need him to do in that moment. So I want to thank you so much for going with me this morning and engaging in this difficult topic.